Let me introduce you real quick.
Sure.
Just wanted to introduce Mark Belton to everybody. He's with Throw Environmental, as our email pointed out. He's going to talk to us about the NFWF, or National Fish and Wildlife Foundation National Coastal Resilience Fund proposal cycle. And their pre-proposal is due in April, and Throw Environmental is the field liaisons for this grant. And Mark has years of experience as a proposal reviewer and can help provide beneficial information. So let's see. Not save that now. I'm going to share my screen. See if I can get it up here. How's that? Is that showing?
Much better. Yeah.
Is it showing the full screen?
I think so. Yeah. I don't see anything else, but there. Oh, that's even better. There you
go. Okay. All right. Whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away. I believe we are recording at this point. So.
Outstanding. So Anita, a couple of questions first. So how many folks are on the webinar today?
We have 21 from all over the panhandle of Florida.
Outstanding. And I won't be able to see, I don't see a list of folks on my end. So if someone raises their hand for questions or comments, I don't know how to deal with that.
Yeah, we'll do that at the end, and we can do it during the conversation too, if you'd prefer.
Well, maybe at the end of each slide, but certainly at the end for more detailed, questions, that would be great.
Okay. If you want, feel free to raise your hand, and we can, if you have a question, that might be easier since it is this type of webinar where we're going through the slides. I'll keep an eye on the chat and on the question panel and let you know when there's a question.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and jump in. How's that, Anita?
Great.
And you can forward slides when I need to?
Yes.
Outstanding. Okay, hi everybody. I'm Mark Belton. As Anita pointed out, I'm with a company called Throw Environmental, and we represent the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation on several funds that they oversee around the country. And you can see those in the bottom left of this slide, where we work. So for NFWF, we have a few funds in New England, a few on the East Coast. Certainly there's a package of 4 in the Great Lakes, and then the National Coastal Resilience Fund as well nationally. And what do field liaisons do? For NFWF, we do outreach if they want us to. We do general outreach around the country, educating people about the National Coastal Resilience Fund. We answer questions about the grant cycle and how to improve your submission. Occasionally, we get asked to review proposals, either pre-proposals or full proposals, as the case may be, if NFWF would like us to do that. And we've been in this role for several years now, back to 2020. So next slide, please. Anita, can you forward the slide?
Yeah, hang on just a second. It's hard because as an organizer, I'm in full screen, so it's hard for me to.
There you go.
Changes.
Yeah.
Is this it?
Well, that's the first one we just finished. You had it there for a second. Let's go to the next one.
Showing the next one on my screen.
There you go. Well, this is the first one again.
Okay.
One we just did.
All right. Bear with me. I have to go in and out to be able to see it.
All right. I've got all right. This is good. All right. So the NCRF program is started back in 2018. You can see the things that it focuses on for projects, nature-based solutions that have a significant resilience benefit to coastal communities, but also have an enhancement benefit for fish and wildlife habitat. I do want to talk for a second about the amount of money in the fund, because I get a lot of questions about that, and it's changed over time. back in when it first started for several years, it was in the 30 to 40 million range, which was a lot of money at the time. But then the bipartisan infrastructure law, came into being and really plussed up a lot of federal agencies that use some of that money to donate to NFWF for the National Coastal Resilience Fund purposes. So for several years in a row, I want to say 4, the fund was up around the $140 million per year. Last year, 2025, turned out there was $78 million in the fund, and that was due to a switch in the federal administration and their priorities. I also want to point out that last year was a particularly interesting year, supply and demand, from the supply and demand perspective. Not only was there, roughly half the amount of money in the fund that had been available the previous several years. So there was $78 million in the fund last year, down from 140 or so the previous several years before that. But we also had an unprecedented increase in the demand signal coming from applicants. The past several years, prior to 25, we had seen about 420 or so applications or pre-proposals submitted each year on average, and then they averaged out about a little over 600, maybe 650 million in requests, all for what turned out to be $140 million available. Last year, $78 million available. We got in about 600, just a little over 600 requests at the pre-proposal level for a total request demand signal of just over $1 billion. So the demand signal went up and the amount of money went down. And primarily that's the reason why folks didn't get funded that thought they might have been able to get funded because they had really good proposals. It was just a particularly tough year money-wise. Not only does it have federal money and NFWF money in the fund, but you can see the funding partners there in the blue box on this slide. EPA, it's got private corporation funding as well. You can see UBS, Oxy, Shell USA, et cetera. NOAA is a particularly large funder of the NCRF. Next slide, please.
Give me just a
Okay, these next couple slides we'll go over, we'll touch on briefly. So there is a geographic focus. Obviously, you need to be in the coastal zone for the National Coastal Resilience Fund by name. And the website for NCRF on the NFWF website has an interactive map. You can actually put your address in there and it'll tell you whether you're in the geographic footprint or not. All the Florida Panhandle is. So that shouldn't be an issue for this particular group. But you can see on this large map of the world, where the gray shaded areas are. Those are the NCRF footprint, and it corresponds to something called the Hydrologic Unit Code, HUC 8, HUC watersheds that drain into the ocean or the Great Lakes. While it's a definite yes if you are within the footprint per the website, if you are just out of it and you can make a case for why you should be in, because maybe you're in a watershed that drains to the Great Lakes or the oceans, then you can make a case for the project being applicable and moving forward as well. And I have seen projects that weren't specifically in the footprint, but made a case for why they should be, and they moved ahead in the process. So really easy if you're in the footprint, and I would urge you all to check that on the website just to make sure. Next slide, please. And we can jump over any that look like a map. The next one looks like a map. Yeah, we can jump over that one. Okay. So on this slide, it points out the musts. And for an NCRF application, there are actually 4 musts, and there's another list of things that are nice to haves. And some of those are more important than others. But let's talk about the musts. We already talked about the first one, which is you got to be in the geographic footprint for NCRF per the website, with few exceptions. But then these are the other 3. One, you have to have a nature-based solution. And secondly, it has to have clear benefits to community resilience. And third, it has to have a benefit to fish and wildlife habitat enhancement. And let me just talk about these 3 for a second. Invest in nature-based solutions. That's not to say that the project you're submitting has to only have nature-based solutions to it. I have seen projects that come in with a mix of green and gray infrastructure attached to them based on best practices and how to solve resilience issues in particular geographies. But you have to make the case in your application as to why how your project is a nature-based solution. There will be, like I said, there will be exceptions, but by and large, you have to have an overwhelming nature-based solution. Maybe your project will have green and gray infrastructure, both green and gray infrastructure applications, and the NCRF portion you're going to fund focuses on the green infrastructure. That would be good as well. But I just wanted to point out what the nuance was with that first bullet on this slide. Second bullet, have clear benefits to community resilience, like reduced flooding and erosion. Let's talk about that just for a second. This is one of the areas applicants should spend a lot of time trying to define. And you should define what is the resilience threat, what is the man-made or natural hazard threat to the area that you're protecting against, and then how does your project actually protect infrastructure against that event, and then what is the nature of that infrastructure. So they're looking for numbers here. If you can show large numbers in your community resilience benefit, that's tremendous. So perhaps people are in the area that's positively impacted by your project, perhaps roads or wastewater treatment plants or other buildings. And you want to make those numbers look as big as possible. So if you have a road, you can get data on the road usage from your local state Department of Transportation. If it's something like a hurricane evacuation route, then you would want to use the numbers that would be traversing that road during a hurricane to show a larger impact. If you have value in number of people that can, and the numbers look very strong, that's a big leg up in the competition of this process. The third bullet on this page, have clear benefits to fish and wildlife habitat. That also is important. To me, the best projects I've seen that define what that fish and wildlife habitat benefit is at the full proposal level have letters of support from folks like the wildlife biologist that works for your state Department of Natural Resources who oversees certain species, and they can write a letter of support that says, hey, this is a great project. These specific listed rare, threatened, endangered species are enhanced. Their habitat is enhanced by this project in this way. That takes all the guesswork out, and it's a really positive thing if you can do that. Doesn't mean you have to have that level of granularity in the fish and wildlife habitat benefit, but to me, the best projects have that type of data and support. Another important point on these three must-haves here is that when you write the pre-proposal, it only has to be, the narrative is only allowed to be like 2 3/4 pages long. It can't be longer than that in the Easy Grants website. That is great from the standpoint of capacity of organizations that are applicants, folks like small municipalities or Native American tribes who it's harder to put a full proposal together. And Lord knows many federal grant applications are dozens of pages long, but the narrative on a pre-proposal for NCRF is just under 3 pages. But while that's a good thing from a capacity standpoint, boy, you've got to be really succinct to get your message across and communicate it clearly to reviewers. I have seen many projects, and I'll just give an example. Maybe it's written by a fish and wildlife biologist, and that person just nails that benefit to fish and wildlife habitat really well. Clearly, the project is a great benefit to fish and wildlife habitat. But maybe they gave, because of that, the space limitations, because of their background in space limitations, they did not, as well as they could have perhaps, articulated the clear benefits to community resilience. And so one was given, a short shrift compared to the other. It's really important that you have several sets of eyes take a look at the narrative when you send it in to make sure it hits the head of the nail on each of these things. Next slide, please.
Okay, while I'm switching slides, I did want to answer one quick question. Kent Wimmer had asked about the slide presentation. Would it be available? And yes, it was sent to all the PERT members about an hour or so before the meeting. So
yep, that's great.
Check your inbox.
And that's a great point from Kent. There may be some previous year's versions of this presentation out there. This has been updated with some of the changes from this year's RFP that was out. So if you have an older copy, please make sure you get a copy of the newer one because it has changed a little bit. Thanks, Kent, for that question. Next slide, please. Oh, here it is. So you've already got it up. Thanks, Anita. NCRF eligibility, pretty easy here slide. Those on the left are eligible applicants. Those on the right are not eligible applicants. And when we talk about applicants, it's really the applicant group, the partnership that is really important here. One thing a reviewer is going to look at is looking at everybody involved in the application partnership and to make sure all the skill sets to manage, run, and do a project are in there, including outreach. And we'll talk about outreach in just a second. I think it's on the next slide. But mostly the applications I get, they're usually in the I would say most of them are the second bullet on the left there, local and municipal governments, followed closely by nonprofit organizations, and then education institutions. Those three, by far, 90-some% of the applications will be from those three groups. Next slide, please.
Okay, can you see the next slide?
Well, the one I'm looking at is NCRF eligibility, but the one I want to see are NCRF things to note.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I see it now, Anita. So I mentioned the things that you must have: the geographic footprint, the nature-based solution, the community resilience benefit, and the fish and wildlife habitat benefit. These are other things that on this slide are other things that you need to pay attention to as well. And if you answer these really, really strongly, that will go a long way toward getting an approval for your project. And the first one is the most important by far, and it's meaningful community and partner engagement. NFWF believes very strongly that in order for a project to be successful and sustainable over time, you have to have meaningful community engagement by the partnership group with the people in the area that are being impacted by your project. And that it's more than just a local government posting meetings on their website or on their bulletin board and saying, please come to the meeting and hear about the project and we'll answer your questions. It's actually understanding the demographic makeup of the area that you're protecting, seeing what type of groups are there, and doing outreach to those specific communities, groups, businesses to get their input. And not only at the beginning as the project is first designed, but if you can show a way where this group or the various groups are engaged all along the way through the project, so that you can show adaptive management techniques to things that they're bringing up along the way and how you might change the design of the project as you get feedback. Things like that is what NFWF folks are looking for when they say meaningful community and partnership engagement. I've talked with many groups, and I'll give you a great example of one that I really liked. It was a group that was doing a project that had a Native American organization that was impacted. A lot of citizens of a Native American tribe were impacted by our project, and they didn't really have good communication with that group. So they went out and added to their applicant partnership group a nonprofit that was particularly well trusted by that community group. And in that way, they were able to communicate and get great feedback from the folks who were impacted by their project. So I think when you build your partnership group, making sure community outreach and engagement is part of your thought process is really a key component, and reviewers are going to want to see that when they look at the partnership group. They're going to want to understand who's doing the outreach, why is that group doing the outreach, what is their particular strength in that area, and what are they doing with the feedback that they get from the citizens. So that's meaningful community and partnership engagement. The other three here, I think, all go to return on investment. NFWF loves to say when they list out their or make their press release for awards, usually very late November, early December each year, they'd love to be able to point out how they have match or leverage or something like that to show return on their investment and that other groups have skin in the game here as well. So when we talk about scalability and we talk about transferability, those are ways to show and demonstrate return on investment to the NFWF Board of Directors. Scalability, an example of that would be a small project in an area, but once it's proven to be successful, it then has a plan to be scaled up throughout the region. Perhaps a small living shoreline in a bay area that has some innovative aspect or new aspect to it that you're testing out, and when it's proven successful, show how you are going to take that information and that method and scale it up in a larger way throughout the entire bay. That's an example of scalability. Transferability is an example of a method on a project that maybe you could take that idea and best practice, whether it's a process or a material or something, and then just take it and use it somewhere else. So maybe something there on the Florida Panhandle will be developed as a pilot project, and the information you learn is transferable to Puget Sound, for example, and they could use it up there, and maybe that's something they hadn't thought of up there. So that's what transferability is. So scaling and transferability, and of course innovation. If there's something new that comes along that you want to try, that's another great way to get the reviewers' attention, because all the great ideas haven't been discovered yet, and we're always looking for new ways to solve common problems. So these are other criteria that will be you will be asked questions about in your pre-proposal and full proposal, and think really hard about how to answer them. But the answers should address basically the idea of how are these NFWF funds being leveraged or added to give return on investment to the NFWF Board of Directors as they award money for these projects. Next slide, please. Great. So when you do submit a project, you have to pick a phase. And NFWF is really strong on pointing out how a project can only be in one of 4 phases. And I always get asked questions each year about, yeah, but I put a project in and I'm saving money because I'm doing 2 or 3 of these phases at the same time, or they could all be done at the same time from a time management point of view. While there may be some truth to that, NFWF really likes to see one phase in a project. And that's because over time, they have their understanding and their experience is that a rigor behind each of these phases, the effort of each of these phases, is really important to having a sustainable, successful project over time. And so one of the things you're going to see if you try to put in a project that is for more than one of these phases at the same time, it's not going to do well. You're going to find it's probably, in all likelihood, it would get rejected and not funded that year. And the reviewers' comments would show that, hey, this project doesn't know what it is. It needs to focus on one of these phases, not 2 or 3 of these phases. So that's a really important point to keep in mind. You need to pick one. And now we're going to have the next 4 slides talk briefly about each of the phases. So next slide, please. Okay, the first one is community capacity building and planning. And the box on the right tells the story. And this is one of the changes from previous years. The very first bullet here in that box. It says estimated average award for phase 1 grants are between 100,000 and 1.5 million. That's a big range, but if you get out of that range on the high side, that's going to be problematic. You really need to go into some depth as to why it's such an expensive project if you get over that range. Typically, this type of phase would only be in the $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 range, but there have been a few based on unique geographical features or what they're trying to accomplish that come in a little bit over $1 million. So in the past, this category said 100,000 to $1 million. This year, it says 100,000 to 1.5 million. And the normal, in a generic sense, outcome of a phase 1 capacity building and planning grant is a resilience plan that says, here's how we're going to go addressing certain man-made or natural hazards, and here are a number of projects that would help us achieve that. So that's a resiliency plan. That's a normal outcome for a phase 1 grant. Next slide, please. So the second phase, site assessment and preliminary design. You'll see the same range here as from a phase 1. It's between 100,000 and 1.5 million. The generic outcome of a phase 2 grant is a go, no-go decision on particular sites or particular projects. So I mentioned the result of a phase 1 is a resilience plan with several projects identified. The phase 2 project puts some rigor behind an analysis and picks, a one or a few of those projects to move forward before the others. And in this particular slide, you can see that you can have 30 to 60% design as part of that discernment process. But the bottom line is, a good bit of rigor behind which of these projects needs to go first and why. And that's the result of a phase 2 project. A lot of people usually want to skip phase 2, maybe put 1 and 2 together or put 2 and 3 together, but it's important to put some rigor behind why we're picking the projects that we're picking. Next slide, please. All right, so phase 3 is final design and permitting. So I mentioned before in the phase 2 grants, when you're doing some go, no-go decisions and narrowing your list of projects to the ones that need to go first, sometimes you go up to 30 or 60% design as part of that discernment. Final design and permitting is exactly what it says. Same range you had for the first 2 phases, 100,000 to 1.5 million. But the general result of a phase 3 project is you're going to have 90 to 100% design, and it says permitting conversations. That's a little general. Reviewers are going to want to see as far forward in the permitting process as you could possibly be, depending on your project, of course. Some are easier to permit than others. The project will generally focus on the 100%, 90 to 100% design, and then it'd be great if an outcome is permits were submitted, even better if permits are in hand before you get to the next phase. So that's a phase 3, the result being a fully engineered, single project that is ready to move forward to implementation. Next slide, please. So here you'll see a larger award range, this time from $1 million to $7 million. It used to say up to 10 million, but because there was less money in the pot last year and anticipated less this year, that money has come down a bit. The more expensive a project is, the more perfect and compelling it needs to be, because obviously if NFWF is going to invest a lot of money in one project, that means there are several smaller ones of lesser cost that will not be able to get done. Implementation, however, is more expensive than those first 3 phases, and that's recognized here by the range of cost for a phase 4 award. And then the outcome is the project is completed, it's been implemented, and you've got some monitoring going on. Generally, a phase 4 project will have not only implementation, but a year of monitoring thereafter to make sure that you get the result that you were looking for, and that you'll learn lessons through that monitoring that can then be applied to that information, whether it's scalable or transferable to other places. I want to put down the first bullet on the right there. I wanted to call your attention to that. Average projected length, 3 years for actual implementation, plus 1 for monitoring is a 4-year length. The key to this, or one key to a phase 4 project, is there's a little bit of a gap between the end of a phase 3 and the start of a phase 4. When we're talking phase 3, maybe one of the outcomes was 90% because you can't call it 100 until you have your permits in hand. NFWF doesn't really like to move forward with phase 4 projects unless you have the permits in hand or it's imminent, and you can explain how it's imminent. There is so much variation around the country with the permitting processes locally and with Corps of Engineers and others, that NFWF has been burnt in the past by approving phase 4 projects, and then they couldn't get started for another year or 2 years or even longer because problems came up in the permitting process. So while phase 3, you don't have to have permits in hand when it ends as an outcome, it's a really strong phase 4 if you can have permits in hand before you start the phase 4 as you apply for it. It's less impressive to reviewers if you've got some uncertainty in the permitting process as you put in your application for a phase 4 grant. The time frame is important from the aspect of there is federal money in the NCRF pot, and federal money lapses after a certain period of time. So they say 3 years for implementation plus a year of monitoring. That's for if there's any delay in the permitting process that's halts the phase 4 before it really gets going, then the money that is awarded for a project could be at risk. And so the timing of getting the project done and having permits in hand, I just can't emphasize that enough. Next slide, please. Right, so the timeline. The RFP for this year came out on February 20th. The next really important date is March 31st. That's when the pre-proposals are due. And I mentioned pre-proposals are the main piece of a pre-proposal. It's the project narrative. There's specific questions to ask, but 3 pages, less than 3 pages is what the narrative is. That's all Easy Grants is going to let you put in, and that's a lot harder than it sounds. Any of us could probably write 2 or 3 pages for a project, but making sure it's succinct and rings all the bells is really where the challenge is. And that's why I really urge you all to have several folks, different sets of eyes, review your pre-proposal before you send it in. And I'll also make an offer here. Field liaisons like myself and my cohorts at Throw Environmental are available for help with that. If you wanted to start drafting your pre-proposal and maybe a few days, maybe a week before the March 31st pre-proposal deadline, send myself or my associates a draft. We'd be happy to read it over and give you some of our impressions. And I found that to be very valuable for a lot of applicants, because we have been reviewers in many years here in the past with the NCRF program. And while we won't review projects that we actually read ahead of time the pre-proposal and gave pointers, it can be very helpful to you to have a set of eyes from folks who have graded these things before. So pre-proposal deadline is March 31st. So the May 20th is when the full proposal invitations will be sent. So between March 31st and May 20th, the NFWF team is reviewing all the pre-proposals and figuring out which ones they want to invite to make full proposals. And there's no rhyme or reason as to how many get invited to the full proposal phase. I would say generally it turns out to be about half, but there's no limit there. June 24th are when full proposals will be due, by a minute before the stroke of midnight, and that's a little earlier than previous years. And I'm going to guess that that's because of the large volume of proposals NFWF got last year. They wanted to make sure they had a little extra time for their reviewers to get through the full proposals before the awards are made at the end of November or early December. And as you can see, that's when the awards take place in that time frame, early December. So the next big milestone, March 31st. Next slide, please. Questions? So my associate, Chris Cortina, is our project manager for NCRF. You can contact me through Kent or through Anita and Joy. I'd be happy to help. And if I'm a little booked on projects to review, I'll get one of my associates at Throw Environmental to help out. That's what we're here for. So please take advantage of that service that NFWF provides. It's no cost to applicants. NFWF pays us for the work we do, and we're there to help applicants. And the goal of that, of course, is to make sure they have very high quality applications to choose from, so that we get the best resilience benefit around the country as a result. Next slide. Yeah, I don't think we need to go into funding basics. You can see those slides, if you get a copy of the presentation, that's fine. But I think I'll stop it here and ask for questions. And Nita, you'll have to help me because I can't see hands being raised.
Yes, I can see. I don't have any questions right now. I don't see any in the chat. If you have any questions, you're welcome to come off mute and ask your question.
At least my screen shows a react button with a hand. I take that to mean people can electronically raise their hand if they have a question.
They can.
Yeah, great.
You can type it in. We have a question here. Let me pull this up. Catherine Alexander asked, is there a web page with previously funded projects available to view?
So great question. You can go onto the NFWF website and look at press releases for the past several years and see the list of projects and their titles that were approved by NCRF in the past, but no, there are not actual proposals that you can look at as templates, so to speak, for writing your own.
All right. The next question is, what are some common mistakes that applicants make?
Yeah, so I touched on several of them here as we went through the process. One big one is making sure your proposal narrative answers all the questions. Don't answer questions 3 and 4 times throughout the process, but make sure you hit all those main points. Pay special attention to the resilience benefit, the community resilience benefit of the project, and quantify those to the best of your ability. That really makes a difference. Fish and wildlife habitat benefit, as you're talking about that, great to point out how many species would be positively impacted, but way more impressive if you can say specifically rare, threatened, and endangered, listed species. And then when we get to the full proposal level, showing validity to that statement by having a wildlife biologist, from the state or somebody else of equal experience, pointing out that, yeah, that's true. This is a really important project for that. Community engagement. I would spend. There's a question on it on the application, but I would spend a good amount of time looking at that process and making sure you're not just receiving information, but you're reaching out and soliciting information. You're going the extra mile to engage people in the process, and you have a way to take their feedback and incorporate it into your design process. That's really important. I'd also pay attention to the range of the cost range for the phase of the project that you're putting in. If you're outside that range, if it's a more expensive project than usual, you need to spend some time and explain why that's the case. There are projects that, for very good reason, are more expensive than the general range that's listed in the RFP. That's okay. You just need to be able to explain why that is. And every year I see projects that look expensive, but when you read through it, there's good reason why. If it is more expensive and you don't explain why, that's not a particularly, that's going to raise some red flags to the reviewers for sure. You will also see in the RFP certain things that are not allowed, some costs that are not allowed. I would definitely pay attention to that to make sure that in your budget information you don't list things that you want to pay for that are that you're unable to pay for. Equipment is one example. You can rent equipment, but you shouldn't be buying equipment for NCRF projects. And those are the main ones that jump out at me just off the top of my head.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Joy, you should be unmuted now.
Hey, it worked now. Yay, thanks, Anita. Hi, Mark. It's Joy Brown with the Northwest Florida Sentinel Landscape. So I had a question. I think it was slide 3. You had the funding partners listed, and I don't see DOD. So I know, in the past there's been that kind of REPI funding for folks in Sentinel Landscape. Just wondering, am I misreading that, or is that just a change for this year?
Nope, it is a change for this year. You didn't misread it. So last year, I mentioned there was a lowering amount in the fund that had gone from about 140 down to 78 in the 78 million in the 2025 grant cycle. And part of that reason is because at the end of the day, it was unknown when the RFP came out whether DOD would be a funding partner for last year. but it was ascertained before funding was awarded, of course, that DoD would not be a funding partner. And so for fiscal year 26, we know when the RFP came out that DoD will not be a funding partner. You mentioned REPI, and that's where the money from DoD came from, from the REPI program into NCRF. You'll also notice that in previous years, Joy, there was a separate DoD addendum that was part of the NCRF process. So if you were a military community and your project had a resilience benefit to the mission and mission assuredness of the local military installation, there was a separate track, a separate addendum you had to fill out, and you had to fill out information regarding who the contact was at the military installation, and ultimately at the full proposal level, you mandatorily had to have a letter from the base leadership that supported the project and talked about certain NEPA requirements that the base was going to take care of. That is no longer part of the process. Certainly, every project that is in a military community is just as important as projects that aren't in military communities, and you can certainly show the benefit to the military installation mission and the resilience of the military installation in your application if you are a military community and your project has benefit resilience-wise to military installation. But because there's no DoD funding in 2026, there's no need to have the separate DoD addendum because the DoD folks won't be having a separate review and a separate look at those projects this year.
Roger that. Okay, thanks for the update. Hate to hear it, but thanks for the update. I did also want to ask a follow-up to that. So if you are in a military community, then one of those, if you get to the full proposal, one of those letters of support maybe could come from like a community planner or something, but not the requirement to come from a base commander. But you think it would look good if you could at least have maybe a community planner from that installation send in a letter of support for a full proposal?
Oh yeah, absolutely. To me, letters of support, there's no limit on how many you can send in. I mean, if I'm a reviewer though, I don't want to be looking at 10 or a dozen of them. So my eyes get a little watery when that happens. But you want letters of support that back up what you're saying in the proposal, right? It kind of gives veracity to the statement. So that's why I mentioned for fish and wildlife habitat, got a wildlife biologist to say what a great project it is from their expertise. If your project is showing resilience benefit to a community and it's a military community and the installation actually would benefit by this project, its mission, the military mission would. Getting one of the community planners from that installation to write a letter of support is a great way to, prove that point.
Great, thanks. And can I quick ask one more? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of emphasis on species. So do you recommend a certain website that could list out habitat areas or specific species of interest for different folks in the Panhandle? So if they want to make sure they've got their list up to date about what kind of species their work could support, do you have a website you would suggest folks go look at?
I don't, but I would say in general, the Natural Resources Department for each state is usually where the wildlife agencies are housed, and they will have, websites with maps that show habitat areas for certain species and which are rare, threatened, and endangered. Each state will have a plan that they submit to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that talks about how they're managing fish and wildlife species, particularly listed species in their state, and those are usually available online. But that I would direct you to try to find that. That's a really good way to. I mean, you can reference that report in your application and say, this information was gleaned from that official report. That's super.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Do we have any more questions for Mark? Just looking at the question panel. I think we've gotten everybody's questions. If not, okay, feel free to come off mute. Going once.
Well, let me answer a question I didn't get.
Okay, that sounds great.
I didn't actually say how much money is in the pot for this year. I talked about how for several years in a row, there was about 140 million. Then last year it went down to 78. I do know that there's no DoD money in the pot this year, but I also know that for fiscal year or for the grant cycle 2026, we are now completely done with the plus ups from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So there's none of that money is trickling through to NCRF. I don't know how much money is specifically in the pot. They're still gathering all that at Washington with the NCRF staff and NFWF. But I would guess it would be that last year's amount would probably be like a ceiling. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was less than the 78 million that was part of the pot last year. I certainly can't predict how many applications will come in. I think it might be less than last year, but more than the previous years, because there just are less pots of money available for resilience projects generally from federal organizations based on the current administration's priorities. So I would say 78 million like last year would be a ceiling for the amount of money that might be available in the current year, and I really can't venture to say what that number might be, but I wouldn't expect it to be more than last year.
Okay. And Catherine Alexander has put a couple of, Kent has also put a website in for the listed species, which.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Kent, do you want to share that on the PERT database? I mean, the PERT email list? I can't share it from here unless it's a document. I can't just put a comment.
Nita, I would be happy to. I think I have to re-sign up for PERT because you guys haven't been able to get my emails lately, and I didn't get any from you. So I think I need to sign up again. I'd be happy to share that.
Okay, and we also have another one. Here is from Robert Fenwick. So I'll try and include those if they're not lost. Let me cut and paste that.
Anita, I also put the Surpass Good Map link in there under critical habitat. Under conservation priorities, they have a critical habitat layer.
Okay, if you and Kent can send those out, that would be great.
Will do.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Robert, did you want to come, Rob Fenwick, do you want to come off mute, or was that your contribution in the chat?
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to share a resource from
Yeah.
Fish and Wildlife, their IPAC site. You can go in and you can either use a shapefile or you can just hand draw a geographic area of interest, and IPAC will report all listed species within that boundary.
Great.
So that can be just a real, it's kind of quick and dirty. Of course, you would still have to ground truth it, but it's kind of a quick and dirty to know what could potentially be there.
Yeah, great. And Joy, I'll forward that on to you, and you can include it in your email with the other links. If
Yes,
that
ma'am.
works.
Rob already sent it to me. Thank you. I'll get Kent and put it all together.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And if we don't have any other questions, I'm scanning the question column here. Doesn't look like we have any questions. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time, Mark. And thank you, Joy, for initially suggesting this webinar. I think it's been very helpful.
That's terrific. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your partners and answer questions. And let's not let this be the end of the conversation. There's a slide up there a little bit earlier with my so I think it's slide 15. Anita, was my associate's email information, Chris at throw-environmental.com. We're very formulaic, Throw Environmental. So my email is mark at throw-environmental.com. And you can email me as well. And again, we're here to help you. And if you'd like to talk to us more about your specific project or review a pre-proposal before you hit send at the deadline in Easy Grants, we're happy to do that for you as well. So I really appreciate Anita and Joy arranging this conversation, and look forward to chatting with some of you again as the deadline approaches.